My starting point tonight is looking at kind of a pedagogical question, I think, of some relevance here, which is that digital work, digital projects, in terms of their scale, are often quite large. And we probably have all encountered this in our own way. Large in terms of the resources that are required for them. And this is why we're often spending our time looking for money to try to support this type of work. Large in terms of digital training that might go into it. And how do we scale that for the classroom, right? How do we scale something that is very resource intensive and resource heavy for something that is the confines of the 16-week university semester? So how do we integrate that into teaching? Now, there's a lot of upside to that large scale, right? And we can think of things like what I would call volunteer-sourced or crowdsourced work, where you can build a community of participation, something that's really important because you can break down the walls between what goes on in the classroom and the type of work going on there and the broader public. And so some of I'm very taken by many of the projects that you see mounted in recent years, where you have sort of public history projects or some sort of scholarly participation projects that bring in the general public. But again, as I said, there's the issue that arises with that often requires, because it's public facing, quite a lot of polish. And again, a lot of resources, monetary and time, that go into making those things successful. So on the other hand, I think it's worth a try, to try to integrate that into the classroom and make that something where students aren't just working in isolation on a little project, but it's something where they're actually working hand in hand with somebody who's not at the university. So this is the goal that I came up with in coming up with this class that I offered last fall, 2013, through Irish Studies here at NYU. And the idea, the course, the scope of the course in conventional terms was to look at the global history of the Irish language. So an endangered language, but a language with a very rich history. Literary history that's very strong for the 16th and 17th centuries. Very interesting in that you can get into language endangerment and cultural history of Ireland in the 18th and 19th century, and public policy and public planning for the revival of the language in the 20th and 21st century. So it was a global topic in the sense that we deal with the diaspora and Irish speakers worldwide, but one that also had to focus obviously a lot on Ireland. And the issue here was, how could I bring this into something that was relevant a bit for New York students? And one of the ways to do that was, of course, to look at the status of the Irish language in the 19th century and the early 20th century in New York. And of course, there was a population not necessarily speaking Irish on a daily basis, but who had it as a mother tongue. And our focus was the 1910 census, and this is where the ideas for the kind of large-scale project come in, because in 1910, the U.S. Census started asking the question of what was the mother tongue of those who were foreign-born. All right, so there's a possibility here of trying to recapture this hidden history, deal with issues of endangered languages and languages that were in decline in the 19th and 20th century. And also do it in a very local way, because in fact, as it turns out, one of the concentrations of Irish claimants, or claimants of Irish as a mother tongue in the 1910 census, was in Chelsea. So you get a very local story building out of something that normally would be quite maybe abstract or esoteric. Now, we can't use sort of your usual data sets for this. We have obviously digitized census forms online, but you can't simply go to Ancestry.com and download that data, because Ancestry doesn't give the language data. It's genealogical. And similarly, our census samples that we have for 1910 that cover, say, 1%, 10%, 5% of the US in total are not good statistically for recovering a local population. So you can't use those national scope samples to get at this hidden subpopulation. So the idea was we needed to transcribe, that is, encode our census data. And that's a big project. That's a project that takes a long time, even if we do, as we did here, just a local study of Chelsea. And so we needed help. All right. So the idea was that the students would do a bit of this transcription and also plan this project and manage it. But we'd also bring in the public to do it. Okay, and hopefully that would, it was hoped, kind of make this an outreach project and not just one confined to my students in the classroom. And I think there's the promise that makes some of the digital work more recently a little bit different than what you said, what you might say have in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, where we have quantitative methods or we have even digital tools that can help us visualize data. But do we have something that brings in that social element? And that's a bit of what makes, I think, the past 10 years or even the 5 years different in terms of digital projects. Okay. So again, this question comes up of scale, all right? So we have we have this big project to mount, and I think you can kind of break it down into 3 sort of big chunks, right? When you comes to planning these projects, and you have to make a decision a bit with these 16-week courses on where you're going to give your emphasis. On the one hand, you have sort of the design, right? Web design, you have your design and your scope and what you're going to encode, designs on how you're going to make the outreach. That's step 1. Step 2, you have cleaning your data. You have analyzing it using whatever tools necessary in order to get a spatial sense of it or a statistical sense of it. And then I think the third is your sort of presentation of data, whether that's in a write-up or whether it's using a visualization tool that allows you to make sense of this big data. And we know if you know from doing these projects, a lot of times you spend 90% of the time doing stage 1, only to get your data at the big, your final results, the big shebang, the 5% of your time at the end. And that, I think, leads to pedagogical decisions to be made here, which is, do you have students spend a lot of their time on stage 1, never to see stage 2 and stage 3, which can be very frustrating. And I know there's a way you could work with this, right? You could say, okay, we'll extend this into another semester with another group of students and continue the class. And that's certainly a possibility here. But in this case, I made the decision to try to concentrate more on stage 2 with a little bit of stage 1 and stage 3, so that the students would not be left just, say, making a design, whereas our students further down the line might, say, be able to actually look at final results. Okay. So in the end, what this meant was, for me, a lot of prep to build the site, but with a lot of the last-minute decisions in stage 1 made by my students. So how to make the outreach, say through Facebook, through listservs, even how to title it, what data they were going to collect, and how they were going to set up decisions for what the public was going to actually collect out of their data sources. We broke it up. We had to make decisions on how to break it up so it was manageable. What could we reasonably ask the public to do? We ended up making a decision where we broke it down by census district and then broke it down into subgroups within that. But then the bulk of the time was really spent cleaning the data after it came in, right? And they got a good sense of what we could expect the public to transcribe. And then the best part, of course, which was the key, which was giving students a chance to really get into the weeds with the social data that they were dealing with, right? Recording the occupation, the age structure, the marital structure, gender, and whatnot related to these claimants of Irish as a mother tongue. So let me just wrap up here by saying a little bit about what worked and what didn't work, right? The big question, right? What works and what doesn't work. I'll start with the positive, because that's what you kind of want as your instructor to hear, and then I'll say some of the things that were a little bit more difficult and where it's always a learning curve in presenting these things for the first time. One thing that did work, I thought, was this focus on that middle section, that we got to the stats part. We got to talk about how you deal with bias in census data and how you deal with some of the peculiarities of things as they were rolling in. We got to spend, and what I like about this is that you don't just do cursory investigation of these digital tools, but actually spend time to master a few of them. So that worked. I can also mention a little bit about the kind of the weekly breakdown of the class. We essentially met twice a week, so we would spend Mondays working just on the data and the tools, and Wednesday took the typical seminar format to get the content of the class, the readings and the discussion piece. So that worked in terms of variety, even just having the 2 days dedicated to 2 different things. The volunteer sourcing, as I call it, that's my nice way of putting it, worked well. It's not complete. We can go full circle eventually, and I can put the data back online, which is sort of my reward to those that participated. We had 95 kind of sub groups of census forms to transcribe. We ended up getting 2/3 of them transcribed between the students, myself, I did my heavy turn at this, and the public. which I thought was fairly successful, and it ended up getting about 600 individuals to use as our statistical base here. What was interesting and unexpected, and again, I guess these things probably should have been anticipated, but what I didn't expect was actually the strong interest even in contacting us from the public. One of our main outreaches was through Ireland House's listserv. So we got folks that were non-academics, and I liked that. I didn't advertise on any academic channels, but we ended up getting a lot of folks that had a latent interest maybe in Irish America, or even an active interest, and folks that had an interest in local history, of course, in New York, although some of our participants came from other places like Boston and Philadelphia, and of course, people that were interested in genealogy. But what I didn't expect is sort of this outreach where they were looking for someone to contact on the website to talk about either their own family history or to talk about some of the techniques that were being in use here. So initially, I had this in mind, a very anonymous thing, right? That's the great thing about crowdsourcing is it's anonymous, and you don't have to give your name or information. You just do the work and contribute. But in the end, I found that it was actually better not to say, make this anonymous, but to put up contact information and actually respond to folks that were reaching out to us. So that was interesting. The student findings also, I thought, more or less was a success. By the way, this is the course website, so you can just go to globalirishlanguage.weebly.com and you can see the schedule or syllabus, anything that you might be interested in taking a look at. But we did get a good sense of some of the grouping that comes together in terms of location of these households, which is interesting, right? 16th Street, 18th, 22nd, and then the Midtown area, which was, of course, obliterated by the Midtown Tunnel, once a very an active Irish-born population there. And then I can show you a bit of the stats. So this is courtesy, we're not getting the full thing, but Kelsey Sasaki very generously gave me permission to present one of her slides here and her findings. She just graduated from here in linguistics in December. But she was looking at age, right? She was looking at a year of immigration. So she was able to look at the year that the bulk of these folks had left Ireland, and the tendency was 1880s through early 1900s, and then also perform some scatter plot analysis to look at the correlation between year of emigration and the age. So again, they tended to sort of group around their teens and 20s, a bit of what you might expect, and leaving Ireland around the turn of the century. Now, just very quickly, what didn't work. I was not as the thought was to implement Google Fusion as one way to visualize. The reason for that is, if you're going to do geocoding, in many ways you're going to end up using Google Maps anyway because they're just so easy to use for actually getting your geocoding, your referencing down. And so then you already had it if you moved on to Google Fusion. But in many ways, I felt there was something more robust needed. And for example, Kelsey had SPSS, statistical knowledge beforehand, knew that package. And so she was able to use that. And that's one thing that maybe is a lesson, is that it's good to have these flexibility, right? You let the students choose the tool that they most want to use and are comfortable with, rather than trying to micromanage all of that. The last thing, though, is sort of the long life of this, and that's maybe one of the issues that comes up with say, a volunteer-sourced project, which is that even after this course ends, and even if, say, we were to do it again next fall or the fall after that, is that the site lives on and it's live and it needs someone to manage it. So then, unlike maybe a conventional course where it ends in December and you get to rest, really this is something that's ongoing, and I will constantly have to monitor this if I want to keep it going. And there's some excitement to that, but there's also, again, that difference of scale that we have to deal with. So I'll leave it at that, and hopefully that's some sort of start for our discussion as we go forward. So.